The morning my neighbor Gary saved my life. I was standing in my kitchen, in worn slippers, waiting for coffee to finish brewing, and thinking about absolutely nothing important. That was the last ordinary morning I would have for a very long time. My name is Robert. I am 64 years old, retired after 31 years as a structural engineer, and I live alone in the same house I bought with my wife Patricia back in 1987. The oak tree in the front yard was a sapling when we planted it together. Now it's taller than the roofline. Patricia passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, gone in 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After she died, the house felt enormous. Every room had her in it somehow, the curtains she picked, the handwriting on recipe cards tucked in kitchen drawers, the indentation in the left side of the mattress I still haven't been able to make myself sleep on. My son was 29 when his mother died. He flew in from Seattle, stayed 2 weeks, cried at the funeral, helped me sort through some of her things, and then went back to his life. I didn't blame him for that. Grief is private. People carry it differently. About a year after Patricia passed, my son brought a woman home for Thanksgiving. Her name was Melissa. She was 31, attractive in a sharp, deliberate way, and she had a laugh that filled up whatever room she was in. My son looked at her the way young men look at women they are terrified of losing. I recognized it immediately. I had looked at Patricia the same way once. I liked Melissa well enough in the beginning. She was charming and attentive, asked me questions about my career, about the house, about Patricia. She called me by my first name and touched my arm when she laughed. My son seemed happy, genuinely happy, and that was enough for me at the time. They got married the following spring. Small ceremony, about 40 guests, backyard of a rented farmhouse outside of Portland. I gave a toast. I said that watching my son choose a partner was one of the finest things I had ever witnessed. I meant it then. They moved back to Seattle. My son had a good job in project management at a tech firm, stable salary, good benefits. Melissa did something in marketing, freelance mostly, which meant her income came and went in unpredictable waves. Within 2 years of the wedding, they had bought a condo that frankly seemed beyond what both their incomes could reasonably support. When I asked my son about it once, carefully and without any judgment, I hoped, he told me they had taken out a larger mortgage than planned, but that it was a sound investment. I nodded and let it go. The visits became more frequent after that. Not my son visiting me. I want to be precise about this, but both of them visiting together. And the visits started to have a particular texture. There was always a reason. The condo needed a new HVAC system. My daughter-in-law's car needed repairs. They were thinking about starting a family and wanted to be financially stable first. Each visit ended the same way, with a conversation over dinner that turned, gently and inevitably, toward money. I helped when I could. I want to say that plainly and without resentment, because it is true. I helped because he was my son, and because Patricia would have wanted me to, and because I had the means. I had saved carefully my entire working life. The house was paid off. I had a pension, investments, retirement accounts that Patricia and I had built together over decades. I was not a wealthy man by any grand measure, but I was comfortable, and comfort in retirement, I had come to understand, is a form of hard-won freedom. The first time I wired money to their joint account, it was $20,000 to help with the condo down payment shortfall. The second time, $8,000 for the HVAC. Smaller amounts after that, $2,000 here, $3,500 there. I kept records because I am an engineer and keeping records is how I am built. But I never once presented those records to my son. The money was given, not loaned. I told myself that. I believed it. What I did not fully allow myself to see, or perhaps what I allowed myself to not fully see, was the change in my daughter-in-law. It was gradual. The warmth cooled into something more efficient. The questions about my life became questions about my finances, framed as concern. How was I managing the house alone? Had I thought about downsizing? A smaller place would be so much easier to maintain at my age. Was I working with a financial advisor? She knew someone wonderful, very trustworthy. Had I updated my will recently? I am not a naive man. I have spent my career calculating load-bearing structures, identifying failure points, understanding where weight becomes unsustainable. I noticed the shift in her. I simply told myself I was being uncharitable. She was a young woman who had come from a complicated family. My son had mentioned this vaguely once. A difficult childhood, money always tight, and perhaps talking about financial security was simply how she processed anxiety. I extended her the benefit of the doubt the way older people sometimes extend the young the benefit they wish someone had extended them. My son, through all of this, remained my son, warm when he called, which was not as often as either of us would have liked. Apologetic about the gaps in communication. He had a demanding job. They were busy. The years move fast when you are in your 30s, faster than you expect. I understood that too. The laptop problem started in late February. I have a desktop computer in my home office that I use for serious work taxes, investment accounts, correspondence. But I also had a laptop I kept in the living room, mostly for browsing in the evenings, reading news, watching documentaries. It had been running slowly for months, freezing unexpectedly, opening programs I hadn't asked it to open. I had tried the usual remedies, clearing the cache, running updates, restarting repeatedly. Nothing helped. My neighbor Gary had been my friend for going on 22 years. We had met when his family moved in 2 doors down and his youngest daughter had kicked a soccer ball through my garage window. He had appeared at my door, embarrassed, 11-year-old in tow, checkbook in hand. I told him to put the checkbook away and come in for coffee instead. That was 1,998. His daughter is now married with children of her own. Gary had worked in IT infrastructure for most of his career, network security, system administration, the kind of work that had made him fluent in the language of computers in a way that I, despite my engineering background, simply was not. He had retired 3 years before I did, and spent most of his days now gardening, driving his wife to her various appointments, and doing occasional consulting work from a laptop on his back porch. I asked him one Thursday morning if he had time to look at my computer. He came over that afternoon with a cup of his own coffee, settled into the chair in my living room, and opened the laptop with the relaxed confidence of someone who has been diagnosing machine problems for decades. I went to the kitchen to refill my own cup. I was standing at the counter, looking out the window at the oak tree, when Gary called my name. His voice had a quality to it that I had not heard before. Careful, controlled in the way that voices become when the person using them is working hard not to alarm you. I walked back to the living room. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the laptop on the coffee table in front of him, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at me for a moment before he spoke. Then he said quietly and directly, "Robert, I need you to sit down. And before you do anything else today, before you leave this house, I need you to call your bank." I sat. He turned the laptop toward me. There was a program open on the screen that I did not recognize, a system utility, he explained, that showed every application currently running on the machine, including ones that were not visible in the normal interface. He pointed to one item in the list, a remote access application, installed, according to the timestamp, during a period when I had not been using the laptop at all. Installed, he said, from an external device, a USB drive, most likely, plugged directly into the laptop. I stared at the screen. Gary was not finished. He had also found, he told me, that the application had been configured to run silently at startup, invisible to a casual user. It would activate automatically whenever the laptop connected to my home Wi-Fi. It sent data to a remote address, and it had been running intermittently but consistently for nearly 4 months. 4 months? I thought back. My son and daughter-in-law had visited in October for my birthday. They had stayed 3 days. They had been alone in the house multiple times. I had run errands. I had gone to my doctor's appointment on the second day of the visit. I had slept while they stayed up watching something on television. I said none of this out loud yet. Gary asked me, gently, when the last time someone had been in the house was someone other than me. I told him. He nodded slowly. He said that whoever installed this application could, if they had the corresponding client software on their own device, see everything I did on the laptop. Every website I visited, every form I filled out, every login, every password. I keep a document on that laptop. I wish now, that I had not, but I had kept it for convenience. The rationalized laziness of a man who told himself it was fine because nobody else used his computer. A plain text file, tucked in an unmarked folder, with the login credentials for 3 financial accounts: my brokerage, my secondary savings, a money market account Patricia and I had opened together, and that I had maintained in both our names out of a sentimentality I had never examined too carefully. Gary didn't know about the document yet, but I knew. And sitting there in my living room on a gray Thursday afternoon in February, with my coffee going cold and my friend watching my face with the quiet attention of someone delivering a diagnosis, I understood completely what I was looking at. Someone had been watching me manage my money. Every time I opened that laptop, logged in, moved funds, checked balances, they had seen it. All of it. For 4 months, I called my bank from Gary's phone while he sat with me. I did not want to use my own phone or my laptop until I understood better what was compromised. I spoke with the fraud department and explained, as clearly as I could, that I had reason to believe my account credentials had been accessed without my knowledge. They flagged the accounts immediately, issued new credentials, and told me to come in person within 48 hours to complete the security review. I called my brokerage next. Same process. Then I called a locksmith and had my front door lock changed that same afternoon, a decision that Gary supported without a word when I mentioned it. That night, after Gary went home, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, not panicked. Something quieter than panic, a cold, structural clarity, the kind that comes to engineers when a load-bearing calculation comes back wrong and there is nothing to do but start over from the foundation. My son was my son. But my daughter-in-law had been alone in this house with access to my laptop, and 4 months of my financial activity had been quietly observed by someone with the specific knowledge and intent to install covert software on a retired man's personal computer. I went to the home office and opened the desktop. I looked at the accounts. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been moved. Whoever was watching had been watching and waiting. Waiting for what? I could only guess. The right moment, enough information, an opportunity that had not yet arrived. I thought about that for a long time. The next morning I called an attorney. I had used the same firm for estate matters for 15 years, and the man I spoke with, a quiet and precise attorney whose measured manner I had always appreciated, listened to everything I told him. He told me to document everything I could, to avoid confronting anyone directly, to continue behaving normally while he determined what legal options were available, and under no circumstances to move or spend any significant amount of money without consulting him first. I followed his instructions exactly. Over the next several weeks, I did 3 things carefully and without drawing attention. The first was to work with Gary and the firm's digital forensics contact to create a complete log of the remote access application's activity, every session it had been active, every data packet it had transmitted, every credential it had potentially captured. This created a documented record of the breach with timestamps and technical specificity that would be useful later. The second was to visit the bank in person, twice, and speak at length with their fraud and security team. They confirmed that while no unauthorized transactions had been executed, my credentials had been accessed from a device located in Seattle on 6 separate occasions over the previous 4 months. They provided me with documentation of those access attempts, including IP address logs, which my attorney subpoenaed formally shortly after. The third was to call my son. I want to be honest about this part because it was the hardest part, harder in some ways than anything that came after. I called him on a Sunday morning, which was when we usually talked. I asked him how things were going. He said fine. Work was busy. They were thinking about getting a dog. I listened to his voice the entire time, looking for something: guilt, nervousness, the particular quality of a man who knows he is deceiving someone he loves. I did not find it. What I found instead was ordinary. A tired 36-year-old man talking to his father on a Sunday, distracted, affectionate in the absent way of people who are comfortable in their relationships and therefore do not work especially hard at them. I began to wonder whether my son knew at all. My attorney had raised this possibility already. It was not uncommon, he said carefully, for one spouse to act independently of the other in financial schemes targeting family members, particularly when the other spouse might have emotional complications around the target. Complications like, for example, loving that person. I did not know. I still do not know what my son knew or when he knew it. That uncertainty is the part of this story I find hardest to set down in words. What I do know is what the digital records eventually showed. The account monitoring had begun the week after my daughter-in-law spent an afternoon alone in my living room during that October visit, claiming to be tired while my son and I took a long walk around the neighborhood, a walk she had encouraged. I remembered now with a particular chill, asking if I would show my son the new walking trail along the creek, asking brightly and with apparent warmth, the way you ask someone to do something when you need them out of the house. What I know is that the IP address accessing my credentials from Seattle resolved to the router registered in my daughter-in-law's name at their condo address. What I know is that among the records my attorney obtained through the subpoena process was a series of messages on a platform that required a separate legal process to access messages between my daughter-in-law and a financial contact she used for her freelance work, messages in which she discussed, in specific and operational terms, a plan to gain signatory authority over my accounts by presenting documentation that my cognitive decline made independent account management unsafe. I am 64 years old. I hold a structural engineering license. I do the New York Times crossword every morning, and my doctor tells me my cognitive assessments are those of a man 15 years younger. The characterization in those messages hit me with a force I was not prepared for. That was the moment the cold clarity turned into something else. Not rage. Closer to grief than rage, actually. Grief for the version of my family I had believed I had. The legal process moved forward. My attorney filed a formal complaint with law enforcement, presenting the digital forensics report, the bank access logs, and the communications obtained through legal discovery. The investigation was handled by a unit that specialized in financial crimes, and they were thorough and unhurried in a way that I found both reassuring and, at moments, agonizing. My daughter-in-law was interviewed twice before she was formally notified she was under investigation. During those interviews, I was told later, she denied installing any software on my laptop. She denied accessing my financial accounts. She denied the communications when presented with them, suggesting initially that her account had itself been compromised. My son was interviewed as well. I do not know exactly what he said. My attorney told me only that he had cooperated fully, and that the picture that emerged from his account was consistent with someone who had been genuinely unaware of specific actions, while being broadly aware that his wife had a particular and detailed interest in my finances, an interest he had told himself was practical concern for his aging father, rather than what it actually was. I am not sure whether that distinction will ever feel adequate to me. I suspect it will not. But I also know that it is a true distinction, and truth has always mattered to me more than comfort. The case took 9 months to reach resolution. 9 months during which I continued my ordinary life: coffee in the morning, Gary for Thursday lunches, walks along the creek, occasional phone calls with my son that were polite and careful and nothing like they had once been. My attorney advised me not to discuss the case with him, and I didn't. I don't know what my daughter-in-law told him during that period. I don't know how she explained the investigation, the interviews, the gradual legal machinery assembling itself around her. I don't know what she told him about me. The hearing was on a Tuesday in November, which was an ordinary gray Pacific Northwest morning, with low cloud and the smell of rain just finished. My daughter-in-law had, on the advice of her attorney, entered a negotiated plea to 2 counts: unauthorized access to computer data and attempted financial fraud. The negotiation had involved, among other things, her cooperation with investigators on additional matters I was not fully briefed on, but which my attorney indicated were related to similar activities targeting another individual in her professional network. She was sentenced to 36 months of supervised probation, a substantial financial penalty, mandatory restitution of legal costs, and a permanent prohibition from holding any financial power of attorney or fiduciary authority. She would not serve prison time, which was a condition of the cooperation agreement. I sat in that courtroom and I listened to the statement read by the prosecutor, which included excerpts from her own messages, and I watched her face during the reading. She did not look at me once. My son sat in the row behind me, and I could feel him there without turning around, the weight of him, the silence of a person trying very hard to hold themselves together in a public place. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I stood at the podium and I looked at my daughter-in-law and I said what I had written and rewritten over 3 weeks of careful nights at the kitchen table. I said that I had welcomed her into my family with an open hand. I said that I had extended trust, because trust is what families are built on, and I believed in building things that last. I said that what she had done was not only a legal wrong, but a particular kind of cruelty, the kind that reaches into the most private corners of a person's life, the routines and accounts and quiet habits of an old man living alone, and treats them as material to be extracted. I said that I had spent 31 years calculating whether structures would hold. I had miscalculated this one. I was willing to own that. But the failure of my calculation did not make her actions anything other than what they were. Then I sat down. My son spoke to me briefly in the hallway afterward. He was pale, and his eyes were red, and he said my name in a way that contained everything. He couldn't find words for apology and grief and love and shame, all pressed into 2 syllables. I put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't say much. There wasn't much to say yet. There would be time later, or there would not, and we would find out which. I drove home through the gray morning and parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the oak tree. It was bare in November, the branches clear against the white sky, the architecture of it visible the way it only is in winter, when there is nothing to hide the structure underneath. I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would have said, and what she would have felt, and whether she would have cried or gotten very quiet the way she did when something hurt her deeply. I thought she would have been angry in the specific way she got angry when she felt the people she loved had been treated with contempt. And then I thought she would have made coffee and sat across the kitchen table from me and said, "Well, what do we do now?" I went inside and made coffee. Gary came over that afternoon. He didn't ask how it went in detail. He had followed enough of it to know the broad shape, and instead we sat on the back porch with our cups, even though it was cold, and talked about his garden planning for spring and whether the creek trail was going to get that new footbridge the city had been promising for 2 years. Ordinary things. The texture of a life that is still your own. The accounts were fully secured. The fraudulent access attempts had been documented and closed. My estate documents had been reviewed and updated with my attorney. My son was named in nothing that carried financial authority until further notice, which was a precaution my attorney recommended, and which my son, when I told him, said he understood. I would like to tell you that my son and I found our way back to each other quickly and cleanly. The truth is slower than that. He called more often after the hearing, and the calls were longer, and there was an honesty in them that had not been there before, the honesty that sometimes only comes after something has broken. We talked about his mother more than we had in years. He came for Christmas and stayed for 5 days, and we cooked and watched football and walked along the creek, and some mornings felt almost normal. He is my son. That is a fact that exists prior to and outside of everything that happened. I do not know yet what shape our relationship will take as the years go on. I know that I will not pretend, and I know that he does not want me to pretend, and I think that is the right place to start. What I know with certainty is this. The morning Gary called my name from the living room, and I heard that careful, controlled quality in his voice, he gave me something. Not just the evidence, not just the warning that arrived in time before anything irreplaceable was taken. He gave me the chance to see clearly, to understand, with the structural precision I had spent my career developing, exactly what was load-bearing in my life and what was not. The house is paid off. The oak tree is 40 years old. Patricia's recipe cards are still in the kitchen drawer, and I still can't bring myself to move them. My coffee is strong, and I drink it every morning, standing at the kitchen window, and the mornings are mine. That is enough. That, finally and completely, is enough. There's one more thing I want to say, not about what happened, but about how it might apply to someone watching this right now. If you are in your 60s, your 70s, living alone, or thinking about your finances in the careful and hopeful way that people think about what they have built over a lifetime, please hear this. The people most likely to access what you have built are not strangers. They are people who have seen the inside of your house, people who know your routines, people who have watched you sit down at a computer and type things you thought were private. The kindness you have extended, the trust you have offered as a matter of love and family, can be mapped by someone with the patience and the intent to use it. I am not saying everyone is dangerous. I am saying that awareness is not suspicion, that asking questions is not accusation, that a man can love his son and update his passwords, and they are not contradictory acts. Gary told me to call my bank. I am telling you the same thing. Not today if you have no reason today, but know where your money lives. Know who has seen you with it. Know that the structures you have built, the financial ones, the familial ones, the ones that hold your life in its shape, are worth the effort of understanding what they are actually resting on. I built bridges for 31 years. The ones that last are the ones where someone cared enough to check the work. Go check yours.